over breaking down those silos of, you know, the university world, where you kind of have each unit, each department is in its own little business entity, and they don't seem to be connected by a central HR. They don't seem to be connected by a lot of other things. And so you, as their leader for APPs, it seems like it'd be a real challenge that you'd have to kind of do it one at a time. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So when I first came, like I said, that was about 2 years ago. Yes, I realized this sort of division by division and going to be a little unique compared to what I'd seen before. Now, what I like is that the APPs are faculty within school. I think that's important to our APPs to be faculty, so I think that part's nice. And so I think what I kind of figured out quickly was I was going to need to figure out how to work within that individualized concept, but centralized, or if you will, some agreed upon things that everyone does the same, so that we're not all over the board. So we, did several things, but one was gathering some data. So across the enterprise, there really wasn't a sense within the School of Medicine what our overall vacancy rates were. So, again, you may lose 2 or 3 in your division, but you may not realize. And also, there wasn't an appreciation for how many internal transfers we had, of which in large part was a symptom of people jumping from one division or, service to another because things weren't standardized. So I could get more money here or differentials here, things like that. And then I think the third piece was we pulled about 3.85 years when our APP. So basically training them up, then they were leaving. And so I think getting those 3 data points was helpful just as a starting point. Yeah. And then really just started building the relationships. So I figured out quickly that, central HR has a different function at CU. So we have what are called division finance administrators, and they essentially handle everything for the division, including a lot of the comp, those usual things that we would see with HR. So I really started working to build relationships with those DFAs and really started focusing on our largest departments and divisions where we had the most APPs, and met with the DFAs individually to see how I could help them, and then started a work group, which, we met, I think, every week for about 6 months, and then every 2 weeks probably for the last. And we just started going through some different things and scenarios and why it might be helpful to do some things the same. And then I think the other group we leveraged was, so I report up through the dean's office. So I shared information, the data with my physician dyad there, and also our clinical leadership council. So that's sort of our physician vice chairs that really make a lot of the decisions. So long story short, from our APPs, which was, we don't think salaries are the same. They're not transparent. Some people are making more than me that have less experience than me. And it isn't, doesn't feel fair. And we don't have a voice, and the list went on. But anyway, worked with those 2 groups primarily to say, hey, it might work better if we could get some sense of agreement on some of these things, because we don't want to be each other, and we sure don't want to train everyone and then have them leave. And so I think we went to the Clinical Leadership Council, we meaning myself and my physician dyad. I think we went there probably every other month for the first year, and then we've been there every quarter this year. So long story short, now what we have is agreed upon sort of things that I think are key for doing the same. So we've done a lot of work with our postings. So our postings look similar. Our job descriptions, we develop templates, so that way, no one feels like you're telling them how they have to do it, but the template kind of helps them plug in key things, but then our descriptions look similar. And then we developed a document called Guide to Employment for APPs, and it kind of goes through all the things from, work week expectations to what's to role on the team, to really trying to help the groups define those things. And then we kind of stuck with our 4 main categories. So take CRNAs and midwives aside, because they're kind of in different buckets in the emergency department. But on our main grid, we did critical care, acute care, surgical and procedural, and ambulatory. And so now everybody uses the same salary grid. And same concept we use with ED. The CRNAs were already pretty well there, and then the midwives. So everyone's working off a consistent grid. And then over that period of time, the divisions, with the leadership of their DFAs really helping, have worked to get people where they need to be. So we've not, it's not perfect, but we've gotten rid of a lot of compression, and people are being hired in at the right rate. And I think for our APPs, hopefully we can feel trust and transparency. We have a process. We do have a method. And then we did the same with how we handle shift differential, weekend holiday differential. So we just do a 15% differential for those, just to keep it simple. We kind of looked around, comped around to see what some other places were doing, but that seemed to work best in our model, because then
15% for nights and weekends kind of. Yeah.
And holiday. And that way, whoever does the work gets paid, because what we found was some people, maybe had, let's just say, a $5,000 stipend for X number of nights. Well, first of all, if someone doesn't monitor that to the T, and then second of all, well, what if I go on maternity leave, you end up working on my shifts, and I still get the 5,000, and guess what? You do too. So that's why we thought 15, and just kind of the way our payroll work would get buy-in, and that we so we got everyone converted to that. And then what we have for what we call moonlighting shifts, so that's, fill-in shifts where we don't have, coverage at night, or let's just say we're have a couple people out on maternity leave and whatever, someone moved away. So then we got a consistent rate on those. So that's kind of our premium, if you will, and that's $1,000 a night. But those are shifts that either otherwise are filled by physicians, or and then we have criteria of how and what it takes for a division or department. So I think those would be, I would say, kind of the first big steps toward that. And then once you get that going, then people start to think about, okay, well, there are some things with the APP group that need to be consistent. And then the same with promotion. So since our APPs are faculty, they're eligible to promote. So they can promote to, we have a category called senior instructor, and then they can promote to assistant professor, associate, etc. And the same thing, if every division does it different, then what we heard from some APPs was completely deflated, because they heard, well, I don't think you can do it, or that's not an option. Others would say, sure you can, but there wasn't any comp. And the third group would say, yes, you can. Oh, and you get comp with it. So you can appreciate that was another variable. So we really worked to, again, educate, figure out what works. And then along the way, I think none of these things are malicious or because anyone's trying to do anything wrong. It's a group that grew fast, kind of came on by storm. And so, as you know, we're kind of a unique group. So most people other than AP worked with us don't understand sort of our training, our needs, things like that. So tried to handle it that way, and from a kind of here's an overall plan that we think would work, and then spent a lot of time meeting with chairs, vice chairs to talk about, have you thought about it? Why not? What might work? How can we help? And so now we have had really good success with our APPs promoting those that are interested, and they've kind of learned that, they follow the same rigor that our physician colleagues do, and that's what we want. But again, nobody's getting turned down because someone says, well, I don't think you can. And it seems like once you get things transparent and more consistent, it's not as easy to say, well, that's really not an option.
Yeah.
Or we can't do it that way.
Yeah.
So
That's really, really good. And so one of the things that comes to mind is, and where the system seems to get out of standardization, is when one physician comes in or they hire the new neurosurgeon or the new cardiac surgeon, and to get them in, you know, they let them have their say about whatever it is they want. So how do you deal with sort of the physician that thinks that whatever they want should be how it goes rather than how it's been standardized?
no, that's a great question. I think there, kind of at the same time we were doing this work in the School of Medicine, we kept our hospital senior leaders apprised, so to make sure they obviously, you know, were in alignment as well. So, you know, that grid that I reference is also what we use when we look at budgetary things, as far as any, you know, funding the hospital is going to fund back to the school, working off the same thing. And we also shared the same data about if we aren't consistent with these things, then we won't, on either side, we won't be successful. So I think the combination of our hospital senior leaders who may be part of those negotiations, coupled with our physician leaders, I think, you know, it's been helpful just to say, hey, we're happy to, if you have an NP or PA coming with you or whatever the story is, a methodology that we use, and then people really stuck to that, you know. And if they haven't, or we get wind maybe that someone's not, we just have a conversation to say, hey, let's talk about what's going on, what the options are. And it's, you know, over time people start just to get used to that being the new norm, but it does take a while.
It does. But what the approach you're taking is so solid. And I think because you are doing it at the system level. Mm-hmm. And so you're creating this like shared knowledge, you're educating everyone, you're getting everyone on board, and that level of like, you know, once a week meetings, you know, getting the right decision makers on board, and then developing a standardized process together that everyone buys into, you know. That's like if you went to a leadership class at the MBA program, how they would say you bring about change and get buy-in. So I think that's great because, you know, so often I see people really struggling, but I think the biggest difference is taking that system level point of view and starting with your counterpart at the physician in the physician group, right? In the physician,
right?
Yeah,
for sure.
Them to push that forward. So then, when you look at positions, or have you gotten this far, where it's like, now what is each person doing? Are they practicing within their scope of practice? And when we bring new people on, how do we make sure that this position is really necessary in terms of, you know, that they're going to, we've got it set up so they're going to be scope of practice, not a scribe, not a resident, you know, that kind of stuff. Have you looked at that?
We have, and I would say that's still a work in progress. And part of it is in thinking if we have the job description templates, that would be part of a starting point, as well as that guide to employment, the things it talks about are, you know, what are the roles and responsibilities. And then, especially since we don't have a centralized, you know, one or two recruiters that kind of know our stuff well and would be heads up, you know, kind of know. So, and then the other way that we are looking at it, of course, the one-offs. So you get, you know, you hear about an area where it's a problem, we'll go in and evaluate and kind of vision on, hey, let's think about what you need versus what they're doing and how this kind of got set up, and could they be more helpful to you and the team and helping maybe move people to the toposcope, or if we hear from an exit interview, hey, the reason I'm leaving is because I felt like a scribe the whole time, then we'll give that feedback and then ask to sort of see the job, get more commitment before the job can be posted again, that it's going to go different. You know, depending on the scenario, the situation, again, use your stakeholders as needed to try to leverage those things, but always try to come at it from, here's how we could help, and let's look at the data, and for the physicians, help them realize it's not going to take away any revenue. That's not the goal. Because
Right.
that seems to be the big myth is, oh boy, if we do this, we're going to lose money. And then I think the other angle that we're working on this year relates to has an onboarding plan, which we're not there yet, but we're working on that. Really, again, same approach, because our thought is if everyone has a clinical onboarding plan, we have now a CNS that's a 0.4 in our department. So that's really her role, is helping look at those plans, work with the divisions and departments. And again, that's a red flag. If you can tell by the clinical onboarding plan if the work at hand is what they need to. So then that's another place we can have a stopgap to sort of say, hey, we need to really talk about what they're doing. Now, with that said, we still have work to do, because we really don't have good productivity measures yet, in the sense of not like what, you know, we're used to normally at a, you know, at a workforce type request. It's usually, you know, based on your unit of service or, you know, your variable and those kind of things, and it usually pretty well drives if you need help, and if so, what kind. And so that's another area that we're still working on, is trying to get consistent metrics and measures so we can really evaluate. You know, now we end up doing it a lot more manually than we'd like. So
Yeah, I understand that. Are your nurse practitioners billing?
let's say yes and no. So again, we have some really what I would consider top performing, very appropriate models. Then we have some shared visit models, which, you know, in the subspecialties, sometimes that is the right thing depending on the patient type, and, you know, they're coming in from 5 states away, you know, that kind of thing. And then we have opportunities where the APPs should be billing, or could be, and they're not. And then, you know, in the surgical realm, I think you lose, of course, there's the global period, which everybody understands, but we don't really track it as well yet as we should, or always think about, is that always where we want our APPs, you know? So we still have opportunity there, but we're at least now getting data where we can start to see more where our opportunities are.
Right, right. And I can see how you approach things, which makes so much sense, is let's get the data.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, then we can tell the story, because, you know, everybody wants the data, and if you can put some numbers with it, or a compliance opportunity or whatever, that gets people's sort of attention. And that story comes from our AP. This is part of why we need to, you know, they know they don't like not doing toposcope work, what they train for, you know, so then we tie it back to retention, how much it, you know, that is not good. And so now we just probably sound like a broken record, just keep changing the topic, but it works. You just have to keep chipping away too.
Yeah, that's true. So do you have leads and managers and all that?
Good question. So within our office, we have the 0.4 who's a CNS who really focuses on onboarding and kind of our precepting. Then we have a 0.9 who is a PA. She's our senior clinical lead. Her primary focus is credentialing, privileging, kind of all of those competency things related to that, and kind of making sure she keeps us apprised of PA license changes, that kind of thing. And then, and really helps me with anything else. She's kind of my person. And then we do have leads, lead APPs within most of our divisions and departments. I think we're up to 38. So almost all of our large, what I consider large departments and divisions, we have them in. And then our goal is eventually everybody with 4 or more APPs would have a lead, and
Wow.
less than that would be tied to another, kind of have a buddy group somewhere. And it's, they have point one other, and pretty much point one until they get to about, I'd say about 9 or 10. Kind of depends on then what all they're doing, but then they have point two of their time.
Okay.
So that model really works, and we've been able to, add those kind of 1 or 2 at a time, and again, tell the story of why it benefits, So
Yeah.
they're huge, these schools out of that group.
Oh, that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. So then you don't have your local administrators, finance people doing the like OPPE, FPP, or like the annual evaluations. Do the leads and the managers get to do them?
So the OPP and those things, yes, the leads with those, they either do them or they work in tandem with whoever the, medical leadership. So when we started, they were, kind of all over or missed,
Yeah.
or all the above. And then the evaluations, I think that's still an opportunity because they're within the division department. Technically it's given by the chair or the medical director. However, for the most part, the leads have input into that now. And again, still an evolution in progress. If there's not a lead, then for sure there's a physician input, but we still have some opportunity there.
Yeah. So what's your in all of this that you've accomplished so far, what's kind of been your biggest victory, like the biggest challenge that you sort of worked through? And I mean, I think you've already kind of told me about it, but like a story or two within that. And then what's kind of your next biggest, dragon to slay?
Sure. Right. So, when I think about probably the biggest challenge and the biggest success, I would start with our APPs. So when I came and met the team, there was all these wonderful people, but they felt very disengaged, didn't have a voice, didn't have a way to know what's going on. Yeah, a lot of people that were at flight risk, and of course they're spread out across many different areas in a large group. And we had just maybe 12 leads at the time. So anyway, I think the challenge was gaining trust with that APP team, that all these things that they're concerned about, we're actually going to tackle and them get input where it's appropriate, let them know kind of the things that are in their influence versus the things that are out of their control, yet we're going to be working on, and then bring back to them information and develop several different forums to do that. So, I think gaining that trust and then building relationships to try to figure out who's thinking about leaving, and before they just leave, you can maybe try to figure out what can you fix to get them to stay. So we had a practice council structure but in place, but no one came. So really work to get people there and try to get in front of them. Here's what we've heard from you. Here's what we're working on. Are we working on the right thing? Then we developed a steering committee with frontline APPs, again, to really dive into that info, and then started pulling our leads together monthly to meet, and then kind of broke into the buckets, like the comp and the job descriptions. That stuff went in the lead bucket, and then other things, top professional advancement, et cetera, in the steering bucket. And then just really started working, and then I started doing a lot of rounding out in the area, spending a lot of time with people, and then just trying to make sure I followed up and followed through with things that were challenges, either to let them know it was resolved or let them know couldn't be, or what we were doing about it. And then now we have a really amazing list of frontline APPs. So we have about, I'd say, 80 to 100 that come to our council meetings every month.
Wow.
which is really exciting.
Really?
And, you know, then they're telling their peers about it. And then we have really good attendance at our steering and lead. And steering is kind of now a thing that everybody wants to be on, which is cool. And I would hope that if you ask people what was going on or what we were working on, they could tell you. And, you know, a SharePoint site, so it's our internal website, a newsletter, or a Twitter feed, you know, a lot of different, we record our council meetings, people can join virtually. So we've tried to really develop a lot of ways to stay connected. So I think from the frontline team, that's by far who we're about, and that's the biggest win, is to see them happy, engaged, involved, volunteering for things, you know, that counts a lot more any day, you know. And then probably, you know, we talked about comp, so as you can appreciate, there were some challenges with that. I think when we talked about promotion, that was probably a challenge in a different way. Comp, I think, conceptually, once people get it, it's pretty black and white. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it makes sense. Now, promotion, you're sort of poking the skunk a little bit to get in a different way and to be really, because what we heard was we have the title of faculty, but it doesn't really feel like it because we're not involved in anything. You know, we're not involved in, we don't have the ability to promote. It's a very physician-centric environment. So I think just to be able to work through that in a way that we could share the story, we could get some early adopters to be people, and just to be able to be seen as a part of the team and have the now opportunity for any APP to go through promotion if they so choose, I think is huge. And to overcome just the challenges of all the reasons why they couldn't, from positions, from the DFAs. And again, I think it was an educational thing, but it was really, we were pushing. And again, now to see, well, we'll get ready to run our numbers again, but, you know, we probably had at least 10 or 11 people promote to assistant professor, which is a really big deal. You know, that's not easy criteria. And our senior instructor, which is kind of our first category, I don't know exactly where we'll land this year, but I would bet we're probably close to 30, 35.
Wow.
And considering we were at single digits and zero before, I think, again, that then gets other people excited about, gee, maybe I could do that too. And those are often those people over that 3-year mark that are looking for something more.
Right.
And if they don't get it, they're moving on.
Right. Right. That's fabulous, because that's just part of your system that you just had to, you had to take advantage of, and create a process out of.
Right. And it should be a benefit, part of your compensation package and part of the professional advancement package that you don't have, you know, at non-academic centers or even some academic centers. So yeah, I think we really had to leverage that, and we really had to get out the actual guidelines around it, because there was a lot of myths, you know, like if you're a NP and you don't have a doctorate, you can't promote, and just a lot of these different things that we had to really break down a lot of myths and present to a lot of groups, and it was definitely worth it.
Wow, good for you. That's a lot of work. That's great, though. That's really good. So what's kind of your next big mountain to climb?
Yeah, I think our next big mountain to climb. So onboarding is one of our big initiatives this year. Again, to make sure everyone has a competency-based onboarding plan, so that, again, that becomes the mainstay to know if you don't have a start, and a new grads looks different than an experienced person, but everyone needs a plan. So I think that will be huge to ensure success for our APPs, but also from a safety and making sure people have the right competency standpoint. So, and some of the same similar things, or it's, oh my gosh, we got to get someone started yesterday, you know, or, oh yes, we have a plan, but it's not written down. And so then people just get thrown into things. So I think that's kind of the next big area, continuing education. We have a lot of variability in the funding days off, what fits into that. You know, again, not unique to anyone else in the country, but that again is we've started with the baseline data and then just trying to bring the story of, again, this is something, if we're going to stay competitive, we got to figure out how to make it work, regardless of if the division is, you know, making money, riding on the fence or not.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
Have it come from a different bucket.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then I think the third bucket is what I call professional advancement. So not everyone wants to do the official promotion, and there is nothing wrong with that. You know, that doesn't fit everyone. However, we want to make sure everyone has a advancement plan. So whether it's really, you know, having formalized preceptor courses to be an excellent preceptor, or opportunities to or, you know, additional clinical expertise in your clinical space, or part of quality teams, you know, whatever that looks like. I think that would be our next, or our third bucket, is figuring out, now that we've sort of conquered the promotion, which then what does it look like for those that maybe that's not what they're shooting for, but obviously they have goals.
That's great. That is really good, because that's, you know, one thing that we're seeing a lot now. You know, it's more and more competitive for people.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a less expensive way, and for your benefit as you go to finance and operations and all of that, is to say, you know, you creating this plan, it's a retention process, and even giving the people 0.1 to execute it, you know, to deliver on it, is still much cheaper than the cost of turnover.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, CME and the continuing education funds, the time, 5 days or
Right.
you get them, and the professional development plan are still far less than the cost of turnover.
For sure.
And the cost of disengagement.
Right.
Some people, we go to the conference and they'd be like, yeah, we have really low turnover. And I said, you know, okay, now you got to measure engagement, because the cost of disengagement is safety and quality.
Exactly. You're right.
So that is something that you are bringing to the organization for recruitment and retention that actually saves them money.
Right.
And
that's
so
very true.
Yeah, and that's not what people always realize.
True.
But I can see it from my side of the fence, and some of the Society of Human Resource Management, they're recognizing in such a tight employment market, you know, nationwide, independent of industry,
Right.
what are the things we can do besides compensation to attract people? And in your field, the number one thing is education. Yeah, people love it. So,
Right.
and you know, an opportunity to grow and develop themselves, whether it's the fun.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's great. Good for you. Go ahead.
No, I just thanks. I think I like how you spelled that out, because that's exactly the story. It's true.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it together.
Yeah. And, you know, quite honestly, the other thing I found is when you get like the CFO and the COOs on board, you know, for whatever you need, for financial support of this, or just one, don't leave them out in this education process. But two, if you can somehow document and keep them in the documentation of why you guys are doing what you're doing, and why you're growing the way you are, or doing the comp. Because one of the most frustrating things that happen is you suddenly get a new CFO and they have to get all this.
True.
They won't accept the fact that this is done for a good reason.
Yeah, exactly.
They just see the costs on the sheet. And so, you know,
for sure.
Yeah, just something to keep in mind. But I'm excited about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And what you shared, it can provide a lot of value for other people.
Great.
Yeah. So I would like to write this up. Is there anything else in your environment, either based on what you've done or how you brought people on board, or like what it took to get there, that would be helpful for other people, or one word of advice you'd have for them in this whole process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the key you really already hit on, but it's really, I think, three things. One, you got to talk to your frontline people and be willing to really listen, and because you're going to hear a lot so good, but you have to be willing to listen and then figure out what you're going to do with that and how you close the loop, even though you're not fixing everything, and help them buy into sort of the dream of, we're not going to fix it all overnight, but we are going to stick with it. Then I think building relationships with the key stakeholders, that is key. And that's a lot of one-on-one, going to people, finding out what's in it for them, being willing to do the legwork, so that by the time you get to a big group, you've already done that. You have a pretty good sense of how people are going to respond.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are probably key. And then, use your data, and there's so many great advanced practice people around the country that kind of gone before you that'll, bounce ideas off of, to not just sort of try to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
And not be disappointed in when there's a lot of work. You have to sort of prioritize and, tackle two things, get them done right, and then move on. I think some people try to take on all 30 at once, and then they don't really get any traction on any of them,
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you have people under you. How have you avoided the team of one? And if so, how have you done it, or what kind of challenge has that been?
Yeah, no, I think, again, when you come, of course, and you have people that are on the team, again, you got to listen to them and be respectful of sort of where they come from. At the same time, not be afraid to sort of push the envelope to say, hey, we got to do some things different. Here's why. And then include them along the way. So here's what I've heard. Does that make sense to you? Here's what I'm thinking we should. What part of this work are you interested in being involved in?
Mm-hmm.
And I think clearly outline expectations, especially early on when people are getting to know you. So, here's everybody's role, how you work together, and then, if you're going to ask for people's input or pull a group together, you really got to let them do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So all these examples that I gave you, the comp, the promotion, the whatever, I had groups of leads from my team working on each one and really trying to have them learn the process, help lead it, or they've taken it, the leadership, as we've grown, and then anytime appropriate, other than comp, just by the nature of that subject, having frontline people involved and then having them lead. I think the other thing I've tried to do is manage people up any chance I can. So always say, here's what the leads have done. Here's what this team promotes. And then have them present with me as much as possible when appropriate.
Nice.
And to their peers, So I think, a team of many accomplishes a lot more and has a lot more expertise. And I think that's just really good leadership, And if you really just kind of do, I really believe in shared decision making and, sort of leading from the bottom. And I think that's where you, and then really see my role more as the barrier breaker down, or to break down barriers, and really a conduit, and a cheerleader.
Yeah.
And not being afraid to have the tough conversations, which is, I think, a lot of the role, so that by the time the team comes, you've broken some of that down to where it's an environment they're going to be successful in.
Yeah.
And then we spend a lot of time talking about, what's in your influence, in your control, and in your control, to help people learn where they fit,
Mm-hmm.
And like for comp, as an example, to say that's in my bucket, so let's not focus there.
Yeah.
Wow. So
that is really good stuff. Really good. I so much appreciate. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay. This is my pleasure.
I think. Wait, let me just get this stopped. There it is.